No, we are ready for you. We are ready for you, Eddie.
Eddie Vandergaard, I'm an innovator, a family office, a father, but also a courageous investor in energy transition, so.
I'll back the ball. Thank you guys, and thank you, Mark, for allowing me to moderate this esteemed panel. I've had the opportunity, that this is a typical 361 session, to speak to you, but not in one of the 350 preordained Zooms over the last couple of weeks, but more, in between sessions. And it turns out it's got a very diverse and interesting panel today. I'm going to dive right in, if you don't mind. We have 45 minutes. So we'll take an hour a la Jack Wine.
You have 35 now. Go.
A full hour. That's good. So my name, like Fiona just said, Eddie Vandergaard, and I run a platform for early stage tech-enabled impact investments in decarbonization, with a focus on agriculture and climate tech. And obviously, right now we're going to focus on the latter, while the former is as relevant. In climate tech, I noticed myself focusing a lot on renewable energy. We have investment in sustainable aviation fuel, stemming from 361 connection. We have an investment in ultra-low carbon gas to gasoline. We have an investment in waste to fuel from the venerable Fiona connection. And we're looking at investments in hydrogen, which we'll talk about with two gentlemen over here, very well represented, and we're looking at the entire air capture investment to have a multi-fuel platform. So very interesting stuff. We also vehemently believe, just like Joe Milam said in the beginning of the day, that there's no concessionary returns necessary here in this space for investors. Impact investors are not petties at the table, and it's not dumb money. We believe that profits, planet, and people go all together. Here to talk about all of this is an esteemed panel, and I'm starting with Andrew Fish. Andrew, great of you to come here. It has not been super easy getting your food. Andrew runs Five Oceans, is a group of investors with interest in all aspects of alternative investing, works particularly with family offices, and he used to run a fund of funds for State Street and the hedge fund space. But he was also an avid researcher all his life. He mentioned as a high schooler that he's been an avid researcher. Well, sometimes researching is dangerous, and sometimes researching nuclear energy is dangerous. You can see that. That was he took quite a beating. But out of that comes a wonderful piece of research, and I think you mostly present the facts, because there's lots of opinions about nuclear, but I think that we're most interested here in the facts. And maybe you can sort of kick it off. I'll tell you, nuclear accounts for roughly 10% of all the energy sourced in the world, double that in the States, 20%. So it's very significant. And the question is, should it become more significant or less significant?
So, just for some context, I've been an investor for almost 40 years, about half family offices, half large institution. I started out building technology to enable my investing, gravitated to investing in it, and then ultimately investing in technologies of change, aside from the whole capital markets work that he mentioned. But investing in technologies of change requires, as Eddie said, a lot of research. So you research a lot of things in a lot of places, then you put it in the context of your global markets and your global economies. So with that said, I'll leave you with two thoughts before I do this. One, we are not invested in space today, or necessarily trying, but it's research. Two is, also for context, an easy example is if you look at SpaceX, a private company, if you want to invest, I don't know if you can or can't, but there are 3,000 companies that are subcontractors to SpaceX. There are 3,000 companies you could invest in that all contribute to what SpaceX does. So just leave that in the context of the scheme. So anyway, typical 361 style. I looked for something.
What does that mean?
Well, I'm gonna tell you. I looked for something in the impact space that I thought there might be an information void, and I was sure nobody else was gonna want to talk about it. So, here we go.
All right, that's good.
And Mark said that was okay. So anyway, so, the question then is nuclear, and to somehow get this into 5 minutes, rather than a panel, I just put up a couple of slides, to lead the conversation, and then I'll be done in my 5 minutes. So, we all know what's gone on, it's all in the news, Chernobyl, Fukushima, 3 Mile Island, and by the way, if you really want to be scared, Ukraine, and the reason is all those were a result of backup power failing, which caused the cooling systems, to trigger meltdown. So that's bad, of course. We're familiar with radioactive waste, having to hold it for hundreds of thousands of years, et cetera, et cetera. So we know all those things. So this is the real question today. I won't talk about any of that stuff now. We can have that, but that's a political conversation. This is that nuclear reactors do not produce greenhouse gases, and they do produce electricity, which could be used for anything from creating hydrogen, as we heard, to powering ships, which are, I think, 2.5% of global emissions, and I haven't seen any other solution. There's a company, Core Power, that's actually focused on that. You could invest in that. But we have to solve those problems, or it's really not a viable solution, in spite of the fact that nuclear plants are being built around the world. There's only one here, and the average age here is about 40 years, so it's not really going to happen here in the traditional way. So the question is, if you look at the left, we get 13.5% of electricity through wind and solar. That's great, but the wind dies and the sun goes down, and it's only 13.5%. It's cheap, but the storage isn't, so it will grow, but it's not a panacea. We're already 18% nuclear, the average plant's 40 years old, that's gonna go away on its own, and we still have 60% coal and natural gas, which of course is part of the biggest problem. So what's the next generation of nuclear reactors that are interesting and low? We have things like small modular reactors, microreactors, safe low pressure reactors. The ship solution I talked about would be low toxicity, low pressure, no meltdown risk, et cetera, and the waste is easy to do. What about other things? Somebody brought up mining, for instance. So the mining industry is remote. They're not connected to a grid. You can't just build a solar plant. You could put a modular reactor in theory. You could supplement solar and wind because we don't have a panacea. So you combine these things together. And of course, there's remote locations where there's no wind source. So there's 4 different things I just want to quickly go over. So the panacea is something called molten salt reactors. You'll get 2 sides of that. Some scientists will say, oh, that didn't work. There were projects in the 60s and 70s in the U.S. that failed. But the biggest difference is, and I will get slightly political, is the fuel that goes through it is not suitable for bombs. When you enrich uranium for power plants, you keep enriching it, you get a bomb. So there really wasn't an incentive to put a lot of money in the 50s, 60s and 70s, I believe. China, on the other hand, has just built a $3 billion test reactor in molten salt. And it has great characteristics. It can't melt down because the cooling is not dependent on electric pumps. You can't make weapons out of it. It does require new types of fuel creation. You can't just take old stuff and reuse it. But that's not an unknown, once again, in the process. And there are actually not, the Chinese led the way, and Gates Tower Power had to pull out because of technology transfer. But there are many other places that want to do this. And I mentioned Core Power. It's really the only good solution for a ship. So the other side of it, which is a sort of a halfway house, is small modular reactors. Because what they've done to get approvals is they've shrunk down the current technology to a modular size, and they put in some safety mechanisms that this sort of Fukushimas of the world won't happen. And there you have all kinds of opportunities with still some of the problems, but cost is a huge factor, and small modular reactors can be produced in a plant, mass-produced, assembled on site, are scalable. You can have 1 unit, 2 units, 10 units, whatever you need. And once again, not a big construction project. And also, aside from the safety mechanisms, don't have the potential to create Chernobyl, Fukushima scale issues. So this is what Tower Power is doing, the most notable one, because it's not only dates back, it's backed by the Department of Energy. It involves GE Hitachi, which is also doing SMRs, but it's more well-funded and more advanced. It has a lot of interesting characteristics. It does use uranium, but it's lightly enriched. The problem there is they used to get it all from the Russians. They're 2 years behind because they don't have to build a plant to do it. But they also have integrated power storage for balancing. So it's something that has a very practical application, and the methodology is to actually replace coal plants because the coal plants are already on the grid. That's already in development here today. There's 5 of them planned, 1 of them under construction. So the last piece of the slide there was a fuel called thorium, 4 times as abundant as uranium. It is not particularly toxic. It requires a different reactor. Molten salt is possible, and the best part of it is that the waste fuel, the waste doesn't have to be held for tens to hundreds of thousands of years. It becomes non-radioactive within, it's a few hundred years, but it's a tolerable time. So there's all kinds of neat stuff, and then I'll also leave you with the don't forget about the SpaceX has 3,000 subcontractors on it.
And that are awesome.
Do you have a question, or time? I'm gonna time the whole thing.
Let me ask first a couple of questions before I take it from the audience. Very interesting stuff. Do you think, in let's say, time span, we have to take a long time span, 10, 20, 30 years, that the U.S., let's keep it to the U.S., that's easier, will be 20 or 18, as you said, your slide said, percent powered by nuclear, 8 or 28?
And we're not just a U.S. group here, right? This is global.
Yeah.
And Germany having abandoned it.
Yeah, well, Germany's
Just like a little bit of.
Germany's abandoned it, France has stuck to it, Japan's starting them up, India and China are building the old ones, but they said that wasn't really for this conversation. And I picked the U.S. because we know it and can control it. Sure. So the answer probably isn't in numbers, because we're talking about transition. So part of what we have to do is transition away from traditional nuclear power as well. The plant's already 40 years old, it's gonna happen. We can't build a new one, we're incapable of. So that's gonna happen here no matter what. But can we actually solve other problems while we're doing it? Can an SMR solve mining problems or small scale problems? Can an MSR work in ships 2.5% of global emissions? No solution to that. So I don't think that number is really it. Is it part of the energy transition model in a significant way? I think it's the right question.
Or should we be talking about hydrogen?
I think, well, first of all, you talk about 40 years. SMRs and things are happening today. Ontario Power's building it. Poland's ordered a dozen of them. Terra Power's building it. The Chinese are about to move into their production MSR. So it's already happening. Some of the best stuff probably takes years of research. And the biggest problem is regulatory approvals. It can take forever, which is why a lot of people are using traditional technology in a different form, but it's not ideal. So it's a yes and no answer, because some in the near term, the best is probably still pretty far out. India wants to build thorium reactors all over.
Arlene, you had a question?
Yeah. So I think I'm a big fan of nuclear power, but as soon as the conversation starts about nuclear, obviously there's voices about the defense and security of the country, as those are high value targets. So I guess the first question is, what's your counter argument for that? And the second is the legislative or scalability of that solution. I've been approached by an SMR company from US that was implementing solutions here in the US, and they wanted to move to Europe, but the legislation was not there, so there was lobbying. So the second question, could do you see it as a global application, or is it going to be a niche market?
Don't stand up, you're good.
Actually, easier.
Okay.
So, your first question is that everything I presented here is, everything I presented here is not building stuff on a humongous scale. That needs to be put in the past, because it doesn't work like this. So everything is dispersed, is distributed to its need. You are right that, for instance, NewScale, the U.S. company, they're building it in Ontario, Canada, and Poland, because they can't get it approved in the U.S. That is a barrier, but I think once the technology progresses, the education comes out, that the approvals will follow. And so it is global. It's not, I said, the Chinese, the Indians, they're all doing it. Does that answer your question, or I missed something? We've too many things to talk about.
Thank you very much, guys. We have to move on swiftly to the next topic, which is hydrogen, which is currently 3% of the market, so to speak. But a lot of people bet that it's going to be significantly bigger in the future. And to prove those points, we have Marcel Werner, who is from Munich, where my favorite football club is from. And he founded Gerotor in the space of advanced technologies for energy storage and fuel cells. And in 2021, he co-founded Senko. Now, Senko made not a lot of sense to you, but it makes sense in Esperanto. And as much as that's the case, the vision is for the fund that hydrogen is the sole universal element to drive the paradigm change in the energy system. That's a big promise. So the interesting and the fun exercise, not the fun exercise, the fun exercise should be to explain that, what the opportunities for hydrogen are to you, and why you're so excited about the space.
Thank you, Eddie. Thank you for being here at the panel discussion. It's really exciting for us. And yeah, thank you also for the kind words up front. I'm here on behalf of Carsten. Many of you met him last time, and I should say hello from him. He couldn't make it, so I'm here instead of him. Well, talking about hydrogen and the relevance and the efficiency and the impact of hydrogen for our society is a huge topic. I think many people have a certain perspective when looking at hydrogen. Some of them are coming from electrical cars and looking at competing electric cars with hydrogen cars. That's a famous discussion. I guess many of you had heard about this in private conversations or so. On the other hand side, you have some similar things, nuclear power versus hydrogen. Is this a competition where hydrogen has an impact? And before I go into details like that, I want to picture something which is more on a global scale. If you look at the world and the primarily energy consumption or generation, energy is a word which combines electrons and molecules. Many people are talking about the electronic side of energy. So electrical energy is only representing 20% of the overall energy market. 80% is fossil-based, molecule-based, in terms of coal, oil, and gas. And when you talk about hydrogen, there's a particular, how do you say, specialty behind it, because hydrogen is a vector between those worlds, and it can be produced out of electricity. That's the green hydrogen everybody is talking about. And you have fossil-based ways to produce hydrogen, the common way, out of natural gas, so to say. And hydrogen can switch between electrons and molecules, and that's the good part of it. It can store electrical energy, and you can use it in a molecule way, but you can also regenerate power out of hydrogen. This is a huge game changer, because there is no other molecule or energy carrier, so to say, which is able to handle both sides. If you talk about batteries, you're only focusing on the 20% market share of electrical power. You miss 80% of this. And so hydrogen is the only commercial ready, market relevant energy carrier which is usable today. And we recognized this a few years ago, but way more important than recognizing such an effect is the market ready? Is it investable? And is the acceptance of the people given so that investors can open their pockets and invest into that thing? And it took some time, but right now I would definitely say yes, the market is ready for that. Back in 2020, that was the turning point of where all the national hydrogen strategies nearly all over the world were set out, and this was the foundation of a new era of energy. Because before that, only large conglomerates were looking into hydrogen, some believers, some entrepreneurs. And a few countries opened their pockets in terms of subsidies and said, okay, we want to push that a little bit. But the huge game changer was, as I said, 2020, the moment when we set up Senko. It was not legally found at that time, but the foundation was in 2020 actually. And so we thought this is a huge game changer. We should invest into it. Simply said like that. And then we made our homework and said, how can we invest into it? The corporations are investing into it. Some governments are putting subsidies in it, or grants. But the huge pockets, the private capital markets, they are not investing into it. So we built up the bridge to attract institutional money and put it into the hydrogen environment. So this is the mission we have. It's opening up a huge universe for attractive opportunities where you can put your money in. And our fund is allocating it not into hydrogen producing plants and stuff, but into technology firms which are necessary to build up the whole infrastructure. Because we believe those cases are generating profit at the very beginning of the value chain, or at the very beginning of the market ramp-up situation. And so, yes, that's where we are focusing, and thank you for me being able to have this introduction.
Marcel, can you explain more sort of viscerally what type of projects you would invest in? And choose one of the left side of the diagram you showed me and one of the right side of the diagram. It will be clear when you explain.
Okay, sure. So, typically, you have one sweet spot. You look at either companies with products and services, or you can have projects where something is produced like a chemical thing or something like that. In the world of hydrogen, I mean hydrogen producing power plants or production plants. This is one side which we call projects. We can enter such projects on behalf of our investors because we have access to plenty of them. On the other hand side, we have those companies which have enabling positions along the hydrogen value chain. This is sometimes a little bit mixed up, but companies have the attractiveness that they are able to generate returns immediately. They have, for example, a steady business. We are not doing venture, by the way. We are looking for established companies within the, for example, natural gas market, and we're partnering with them, providing growth capital so that they can capture opportunities evolving from the hydrogen market ramp-up, which will be, I think, many of us agree on that thing. It will be long-lasting. It will be something like the renewable power industry 20 years ago, or the oil and gas industry like 100 years ago. On the other hand side, entering partnerships to build up production facilities to produce hydrogen, it's going to be a huge market demanding a lot of capital, but those projects have longer cycles until they pay back the money. Then you have 2 years of planning, 2 years of building up the whole thing, 1 year of proving that the operation is right. So if you invest today, it will at least take 5 years until returns come back. And that's why we decided to divide strictly between those two sides, companies and projects. And right now, we believe it is great to capture opportunities from company investments, because they are already existing today. There are plenty of opportunities given, as well as in Europe, as all over the world. And on the other hand side, projects will reach a certain maturity for institutional investors within the next couple of years, I would say 2 to 5 years, and then the time to capital return is a bit shorter. Thank you for this.
I think, in a matter of time, we reserve the questions for later or offline. But it fits neatly into the next speaker, whose name is Baruch Halpert, and who is CEO of Electric Global. And when everybody talked about hydrogen power, he misunderstood and he created hydrogen powder. And he will tell everybody about it. The first time I saw an energy carrier live that looks like something else, by the way, you can find it in the harbor of Rotterdam, but still. It's interesting because he mentioned in one sentence what he does, which I always love. It's like coffee powder for a coffee machine, simplifying storage, transport, and use of hydrogen in off-grid applications. That makes total sense to me. Can you explain to us what the genesis of the company was, where you are right now, the projects you're currently involved in, and make use of this, and where do you see the future?
Thank you, Eddie. First of all, thank you, Mark, for inviting us to participate in this panel. Great being here. And without further ado, so this is what we do. This is powdered hydrogen. You asked me about how we started. So, like everything else in life, I'm mistakes. So, I was approached by a company that just graduated from an incubator program. The technology perceived to be much more advanced than it really was. And like many other investments, you start investing thinking it's one point, and actually it was much earlier technology. So we started rolling our sleeves and took active participation, and then we basically developed the technology from scratch. The original idea, by the way, not in powder, was in liquid. But we found out the liquid doesn't work because this is powder, and once you mix it with water, it settles. So it separates. So chemically, it's impossible. So in order to solve that problem, we said, why not mix its own balls? Meaning when you release the hydrogen. So this thing, like Eddie said, we mix it with water, with a catalytic process to generate the hydrogen on demand. So this created the coffee analogy. So it's like taking the espresso, putting the capsule, and suddenly it's so simple. It's a bit more complicated, but for argument's sake. So we started spending the money long before 2020. So and when we started investing, people said, why do you need hydrogen? You have batteries. So that was the common objection that we tackled. But I agree with you, Marcelo. The turning point in investing in hydrogen being recognized as the fuel of the 21st century was 2020. That was the point when the EU approved, I think it was 700 or 800 billion budget into the next 5 years into R&D, into hydrogen. And then in 21, we felt like this, like somebody, I think it was also on the backbone of the corona, that people understood that, the planet has their own plans, and this is, you can't negotiate for the planet. So you better start doing energy transition, and this takes time. So since 2018, we invested over $25 million developing the technology. And where we are today, we've de-risked the technology to the fact that we've announced building our first plant for powder in the port of Amsterdam that will be operative as of 2026, together with Zenith Energy Terminals, a US-based company with operations in Europe. And based on their wind turbines, we're going to have green hydrogen powering up to a plant of 500 tons. Why 500 tons? Because they don't have 10 megawatts of power. If they had, we would do a 5,000 ton plant per annum. And with the release systems, with the risk, we built already 2 prototypes that run hundreds of times with repeatable results. And right now, we're working on a go-to-market product that will be engineered, certified, and produced en masse, and should be on the market by 2025. I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah. Is there, can I take a question, Mark, or look at the timekeeper here?
Well, any questions on the hydrogen team, since we got both the duo here, we talked about it in the earlier panel? Wish, Hank was here.
I got a question.
Yeah.
On the hydrogen. Back to you, Marcel. Can you please share with the audience the difference between the industrial hydrogen and the green hydrogen? And also the scalability right now, as we're talking about the transition, we have the third gentleman, and I wish you feel better, by the way, on your foot.
Thanks for that.
That was pickleball, by the way.
Pickleball, actually. Next time you need a better partner.
I'm all in.
Get a better partner next time. So, also, on the after the hydrogen, on the nuclear, I'm always concerned about the water that is being used to cool the reactors. What do you guys do with it, and how much does the fish and the marine life enjoy it? And adding also the waste, the atomic waste, I would love to know the truth about what you do with it. And when I say you, not you personally, you know that, governments and other jurisdictions. Thank you.
Hydrogen first.
Thank you, Camille, for the good question. So, I summarize it. The first question was industrial versus green hydrogen. The second question was the scale-up question. Regarding the first one, the overall target of the implementation of hydrogen into the new energy system is to decarbonize the industries, helping the planet to get green or climate neutral. And you can reach that with hydrogen produced out of CO2-free energy. And with that in mind, green hydrogen makes sense. On the one hand, right? Because green hydrogen is at the moment nearly cost competitive to gray hydrogen if you have the cheapest sources of green power, so to say. Back in the desert, in Arabic countries, you can produce so cheap renewable power that hydrogen can be nearly cost competitive in specific applications compared to conventional hydrogen. However, this is a niche situation we have. So what governments do is, like the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, they put an instrument in place subsidizing a kilogram of hydrogen produced with renewable power by $3. So immediately, green hydrogen came cheaper than industrial produced hydrogen, and, for example, in the United States. And last week in Europe, the European Hydrogen Bank was officially being announced by the by the European Commission, putting a similar instrument in place, funded with 150 billion to support the green hydrogen. So, in a nutshell, many efforts are taken to kickstart green hydrogen. This is a major push for the whole supply chain, technology-wise, and many market situations are newly allocated out of this push by governments. So I would say green hydrogen is cheaper now because of governmental backing, but it will be cheaper in the future when the production of renewable power is decreasing as it's predicted. And CO2 pricing is skyrocketing. Then you have multiple effects to make green hydrogen even the cheapest source in the future.
While you are on the subject, can you also touch on the storage and the transportation of the liquid?
The liquid hydrogen.
Exactly. And like what happened in Ohio with the train explosion and the gas leak and everything else that the media decided not to tell us about it. But maybe you can tell us about it.
To be honest, I'm not familiar with the insights of the Ohio case. So I'm
Many
postponing.
people in this room maybe did not even hear about it.
I guess so. But regarding your first question,
The transportation and the storage.
transportation and storage, I think there are many ways to transport and storage hydrogen. One way is here to pulverize it. It's probably a certain segment of transportation and storage. However, in a nutshell, it's possible. It's possible and it's economically possible.
How safe?
And it's very safe.
Can I intervene?
Yeah, sure. You can anytime.
Camille, right?
True.
So you bring a very relevant point. So our view is that hydrogen, like fossil fuels, you're going to end up with multiple products. Multiple products that are going to be stored and shipped differently to address different markets. So hydrogen started as an industrial gas. So it was mainly in liquefied form and compressed form, and also in ammonia, so it's a third form. Now that we are turning hydrogen into the fuel of the 21st century, we're going to have multiple forms, like you have in fossil fuels. You have a benzene, you have a kerosene for jet fuel, diesel, you have what they call natural gas, or all kinds of forms of gases, each of them for different applications. So when we look at the hydrogen market, take it 20 years from now, you're going to end up with 4 or 5 leading ways to store hydrogen. Liquefied hydrogen, point to point, maybe LOHC, if the prices go down, LOHC, liquid organic hydrogen carrier, that you deliver it from point to point. You're going to end up with the end usage for last mile. Our last mile is going to be a key player. It's going to be a category maker. We're going to have compressed hydrogen. It's going to be, in the end of the day, you make economical choices. Technology is nice, but numbers rule supreme. So you're going to have a couple of forms of hydrogen storage and products that are going to be priced differently, like natural gas, like oil, based on where you actually exploit them, how you transport them, how you deliver them to market. No different than any other energy product. So what we're looking is into a market in transition. There are going to be many trials and errors, but the train has left the station. I hope I've answered your question.
I totally agree.
Thank you.
Much appreciated. It was great. Great question. We have to move on, and we're gonna see the topic from a different side. I want to introduce to you Peter Lupov, who's a very interesting cat. He's an impact investor, educator, and ex-chief executive officer of Net Impact, a very large nonprofit with a mission to inspire, equip, and activate emerging leaders to bring positive change to the world. That's a whole mouthful. He's also, which I really like, made and constructed a family office who's committed to 100% impact investment portfolio, which is rare, and even more rare, which is brilliant. You wrote that chart together with the entire family, which you just mentioned to me, which is really nice. So seeking market returns alongside demonstrable social and environmental impact benefits. So if there's anybody who should be in an impact conference, it's you. Tell us how you think about investing in impact, and then specifically for our panel, energy transition.
Sure, thank you for that. I also teach impact investing at Fordham University. I did at Yale until Mario Gabelli, who the Gabelli School of Business at Fordham, said that it was a lot closer to get from Brooklyn to Lincoln Center than to New Haven. But when I talk to students about it, I show them the data that suggests that you don't have to give up returns for measurable social or environmental impact. And having been a true story of all that is I spent 30 years as a hedge fund guy and worked for Marty Whitman, Deep Value at Third Avenue Fund, and then Izzy Englander at Millennium, running an event-driven book, and then started my own firm, Tiburon, sold that. My wife is ex-Lehman Brothers, and so we're first-generation wealth and understand markets. That's what we do. So talking to students about the idea, like, why would we give up the option to do right by people and planet. Like, if we can make the same returns and not screw people and planet, why would we give up those free options? So just thinking about it like a manager, it's a great thing. I can go home and sleep at night knowing I'm not screwing the world. Why would I give up those options? So it starts with a public securities portfolio. It makes sense to run an ESG screen and ring out the worst. That's low intentionality. That's the capital markets nudges, right? You're investing in companies that are top quartile. You run out. You don't invest in businesses that don't meet your organization or your family office's interests. So we're a signatory to something called Divest Invest, so we commit to a fossil fuel-free portfolio. We don't invest in private prisons, we don't invest in weapons manufacturers. Boozing casinos are fine, because I like boozing casinos. Everybody's impacted there, I'm But we're a small family office in that our staff, if you include my wife and son, there are 5 of us. I have one analyst, Nesha, some of you in the room probably know Nesha. And one ops person. And so the way we get more measurable or intentional impact is by being an LP in funds. What we do well, what's our comparative advantage? We look at managers and understand where our communities and conflicts of interest. I understand that. That's what we can do. I don't know the underlying businesses, and like many family offices that might think they're the Medicis, and because they made money one way, they can make money in all things. Again, markets create humility for you. If you're right 55% of the time, you're a genius. And I take that to heart. So I'd rather give somebody like Tenzin money to pick the right ways to invest for climate action or for energy transition than think that I understand myself how to do that. It's a better way for us to do it, and that way we build a portfolio around impact. I also think the dirty little secret is, because there's still a number of people that don't believe in climate science, actually it's a buying opportunity. There's embedded higher returns because the world will eventually come to that conclusion. I remember, as a hedge fund guy, loving that moment where nobody agreed with me and thinking that we were right. Maybe not always, but again, 55% is all you need to do right. Be a genius. So eventually, people are going to catch up and realize that the climate solutions that we're working on are integral. And so there's embedded in these investments, I think, outsized returns. What John Elkington, some of you know him, he wrote a book called Green Swans. His Green Swan is the alternative to Nassim Taleb's Black Swan, that there is embedded surprise great opportunities, exponential outcomes that come from investing in new social enterprises. That's how we compose the portfolio and how we think about it.
And so in terms of private investing, you choose you curate your managers. You choose managers who invest your money in funds. And do you then, how do you diversify over different asset classes?
Yeah, that's a good point, and I think this is another issue for many smaller single-family offices, that they're not professionally managed. You're not thinking about portfolio risk. And, I think of the portfolio like I would think of it without an impact overlay. There's just one extra element I'm putting an impact overlay. I'm looking for cheap on an intrinsic basis with a prospect of asymmetric prospect of upside. And I'm applying the lens of our investment policy statement, a document that our family has written together. And a bunch of years ago, my 11-year-old son involved in that as well, because we don't want the dysfunction of intergenerational wealth transfer that occurs in so many families. So we care very much about social justice and racial equity. We care very much about climate and energy transition. And, we're making those one-off investments in and hopefully harnessing slightly different impacts. There can be concentration like there can be in a public securities portfolio, though. That's a good point. That's more qualitative when you're investing privately.
Thanks very much, I really
Appreciate it, Engel. Lastly, but certainly not least, Tenzin Sheldon. A refugee from Tibet working as a climate leader, went to my alma mater, Stanford, and founded multiple companies in the space, and currently runs the Pulse Fund, Growth Equity Venture. And it focuses on a number of different things, wide baskets: food, agriculture, infra, energy, and mobility. And very impressively, is a finalist for the Times 100. Tenzin, can you explain a little bit about what you do, what the fund is about, and what do you focus on within the fund, what type, what stage, what gets you excited?
Hi, everyone. I hope that everyone's hydrating. It's quite warm in here, but I'm really happy to be here. A little bit about my background. I'm from Tibet. Maybe the furthest of anyone here. Is anyone here further from Tibet? Came here on a green card lottery and went to college, community college in Oakland, and then went to Stanford and became the first Tibetan to win the Rhodes Scholarship, where my dissertation was around proving that the United Nations number on displacement was wrong. The UN had estimated that 250 million people will be displaced in the next 30 years. And that number has turned out to be north of about 1 billion people. So we are dealing with an astronomical problem, but I think this is a problem of perception. I actually don't believe in the theory of calling what we're doing impact investment, because sometimes that gives the notion that there is concessionary returns. In fact, I think if you're working in the green space, if you're working in climate, you are doing impact. That is impact. I'm more interested in solutions that are nature-based that nobody has talked about. So 80% of our planet's biodiversity, 80%, I want you to think about that number. That means our grasslands, our marine life, the Himalayas, where I'm from, and the Amazon. 80% are protected by less than 4% of its population. 4% of humanity protects 80% of the land. And can I ask you, how many of you think that they have funding? There's 0.0001% of funding that goes to indigenous peoples. And I'm really excited to find solutions where indigenous persons, people who are front lines of climate, people who are disproportionately impacted by climate, can be the solutionists that we are funding. So for example, there is a drone company that uses drones and works with indigenous communities to find ways to regenerate their land. It's an incredibly profitable business. I think that we need to start de-risking technologies like this that is working on private-public partnerships. I haven't seen enough of it. That's why I got into investments, because as a founder who had raised hundreds of millions of dollars from investors, I had, completely shattered a lot of the glass ceilings in my 20s. I realized that it has to be the climate leader and solutionist who has the frontline experience to go out there and actually start investing in companies that no one was looking at twice. And I asked myself, why is no one looking at these companies twice? And it's because the founders oftentimes don't have the right connections. They don't have the right principles who will back them. And so I think we need to have greater discussions about how do we look at nature-based solutions of people who are already doing the work. The technology is important. I invest in these technologies, hydrogen, looking at fusion in nuclear. But what I'm more interested in is what are the nature-based solutions that nobody's looking at investing in? Because I think 30 years from now, we will be remissed.
Drop the mic.
Any questions from the audience?
Tenzin, I love what you're saying. Can you give us an example of something you've invested in that excites you?
Yeah.
Yes, we invested in a company that uses algae as a sustainable aviation fuel. And the way that, so in oceans, right now there's been the sourcing of algae, so 2% of sourcing of algae.
But you know what Hank Rogers said? He said, we don't want to create new disasters by fixing current disasters. And I think that's an important lesson here. So we invested in this company that actually grows its own algae, because if you take more than 22% of algae in the ocean, there will be another crisis, which is the biomarine crisis. So we invested in a company that grows its own algae and uses it as a full staff biopellet for all plastics. That's one. The second company is, we invested in a company that does soil regeneration. Right now, most people don't realize that the quickest way to decarbonize our planet is unfortunately not hydrogen or nuclear. That's not the quickest way. They are important ways, and they can have huge mitigative effects, but the quickest way is soil. But soil is not sexy. Soil doesn't get the level of garnering of attention that people want, but soil is the most effective way. So there is a not-for-profit that Nobel laureate Wangari Maathai started in Kenya about 2008, and it has planted more trees and regenerated more native soil than any other organization. They are now going into the for-profit business. A lot of this is also edifying. It's edification, teaching people who are on the front lines, a lot of women of color, who don't have the educational background and experiences to be able to take their company and make it for profit when they know they have the solution. So we're working with them as well.
I wish we could just keep going with this panel, and Eddie thinks we can. I usually do let it happen, but we have one last panel, and we have breakouts. By the way, there'll be wine bottles in the breakout rooms. I figured to get you to the breakout rooms faster. But let's thank this panel. Energy transition. Last one.
Come join our 361 firm community of investors and thought leaders. We have a lot of events created by the community as we collaborate on investments and philanthropic interests. Join us.